She sacrificed everything for him: love, loyalty, even her dreams. But the moment he tasted wealth, he tossed her aside like yesterday's news. He thought he had it all, until fate delivered a cruel twist that would leave him begging for the woman he betrayed. Aisha had always been a woman of quiet strength, the kind of person who bore hardships with a smile and found hope even in the darkest of times. She had married Omar out of love, believing that their bond would withstand anything life threw at them. Even when their finances were tight, when there was barely enough to get by, she never once complained. Instead, she worked tirelessly, taking on extra sewing projects, selling handmade crafts in the market, and stretching every coin to make sure they had food on the table. Omar, once a man full of dreams, had begun to grow bitter. The struggles of their daily life weighed on him heavily, and he resented their lack of progress. He had hoped for a grander life, for riches and comfort, but instead he found himself trapped in a cycle of endless hardship. Aisha, however, never wavered. She believed in him, in their future together, and she reassured him that better days would come. Every morning, Aisha woke before sunrise to prepare a simple breakfast for Omar before he left for work. Even if they had nothing but tea and leftover bread, she made sure it was warm and ready for him. When he returned home, exhausted and frustrated, she welcomed him with a gentle smile, never letting him see her own fatigue. She would massage his aching shoulders, listen to his worries, and remind him that they still had each other, that love was enough. But love, as strong as it was, could not buy them the life Omar secretly longed for. Their small rented home needed repairs they couldn't afford. Bills stacked up faster than they could pay. Aisha found herself skipping meals so Omar could eat, pretending she wasn't hungry when in truth, her stomach ached from the emptiness. Still, she pushed forward, believing that one day all their sacrifices would be worth it. Omar, however, had begun to lose faith. He watched as wealthier men drove by in expensive cars, their wives dressed in fine clothes and jewelry. He started to wonder what life could be like if he had chosen differently. Aisha, oblivious to the doubts creeping into his heart, continued to love him with everything she had, never suspecting that the man she had given her life to was already drifting away. Omar sat outside their small rented home, staring at the dim streetlights flickering in the distance. The evening air was thick with the scent of street food from vendors who catered to customers with money to spare. Money he did not have. His frustration burned inside him like a slow fire, growing stronger with each passing day. He had worked tirelessly, yet their lives remained the same. A cycle of struggle, unpaid bills, and endless sacrifices. Aisha had always been his anchor, her unwavering support keeping him from sinking. But now even her kindness began to irritate him. He resented the way she accepted their fate so easily, as if love alone could fill their empty pockets. She never asked for more, never complained about what they lacked. But Omar wanted more. He wanted wealth, comfort, and the admiration of others. He wanted to walk into a restaurant and order food without checking his wallet first. He wanted to buy expensive clothes instead of patching up old ones. He wanted the life of the rich men he saw around him, men who didn't have to struggle to provide for their families. One evening, fate placed him in the path of everything he desired. At a business event where he had gone in search of better opportunities, he met Nadia, a woman who radiated luxury and sophistication. She was beautiful, confident, and, more importantly, rich. Dressed in silk and adorned with diamonds, she carried herself like someone who had never known hardship. She took an interest in Omar, flattering him with words that made him feel important. She spoke of grand vacations, fine dining, and a world beyond his reach. Nadia saw the hunger in Omar's eyes, not just for wealth but for an escape from his current life. She dangled temptation before him, inviting him into a life where struggle did not exist. She made him feel like a man of value, something he hadn't felt in years. Unlike Aisha, who reminded him of their hardships with every small sacrifice she made, Nadia offered him a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of. Omar found himself drawn to her, intoxicated by the possibility of something better. He began to resent Aisha even more, seeing her not as his partner but as a weight holding him back. He convinced himself that he deserved more, that he had worked too hard to remain stuck in a life of poverty. And so, he made a choice, unaware that fate was quietly weaving a lesson he would never forget. Omar stood in the doorway of their small home, watching Aisha as she carefully folded his clothes. She had no idea that in a matter of moments her world would shatter. His heart pounded in his chest, not with regret but with impatience. He had already made up his mind. He was leaving. Nadia had shown him a different world, one filled with luxury, ease, and the kind of admiration he had always craved. With her, there were no nights of counting coins, no meals of stale bread and watered-down soup. She had promised him a future where struggle did not exist, where he could finally be the man he had always wanted to be. Aisha turned to him with her usual gentle smile. "Dinner is ready," she said, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. Omar exhaled sharply. "I'm not staying," he said coldly. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm leaving, Aisha. I can't do this anymore." His voice was firm, almost distant. "I deserve better than this life." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bed. "Better," she whispered. "Omar, we're struggling, yes, but we have each other. We always have." "That's not enough," he snapped. "You're too content with suffering. I'm tired of it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not beg. She simply stared at him, as if searching for the man she once knew. But he was already gone. When Omar walked out, he did not look back. He told himself he was making the right choice, that love without wealth was a burden he no longer wanted to carry. Aisha sat in silence long after he had left, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on her like a crushing force. The man she had given everything to had discarded her as if she were nothing. For days she barely ate, barely slept, barely existed. She had built her world around Omar, and now that world had crumbled. But life did not stop. The rent was still due. The bills still needed to be paid. With no one to rely on, Aisha had to gather the pieces of her shattered heart and find a way to survive. She took on more work, stitching clothes late into the night, selling whatever little she could to make ends meet. It was exhausting, but she refused to give up. She had lost the man she loved, but she would not lose herself. What Omar did not know was that his betrayal, while painful, would awaken a strength in Aisha that even she did not know she had. The first few weeks after Omar left were the hardest. Aisha had spent so many years pouring her love and energy into her marriage that without it, she felt like an empty shell. But self-pity would not feed her, nor would it pay the rent. If Omar had abandoned her, she would prove, to him and to herself, that she could survive without him. Determined to rebuild her life, Aisha threw herself into work. She took on extra sewing projects, waking before dawn and working late into the night. But no matter how hard she pushed herself, the money she earned barely covered her expenses. The reality was cruel. No matter how skilled she was, there was only so much she could do on her own. Then fate intervened in an unexpected way. One afternoon, while delivering a set of handmade dresses to a wealthy client, Aisha met Madame Salma, a well-known businesswoman who owned one of the most successful clothing boutiques in the city. The older woman took notice of Aisha's craftsmanship, admiring the detail and precision in her stitching. "These hands," Madame Salma said, holding Aisha's fingers gently. "They have talent, but talent alone won't change your life. Do you want to learn how to turn your skill into something greater?" Aisha hesitated. She had spent years working for survival, not for success. Could she really build something of her own? But the fire in Madame Salma's eyes awakened something within her, something that had been buried under years of sacrifice and struggle. "Yes," she said firmly. Teach me. Under Madame Salma's mentorship, Aisha learned the art of business. She studied pricing, fabric sourcing, and marketing. She learned how to present herself with confidence, how to negotiate, how to see herself not as a struggling tailor but as an entrepreneur. It was not easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the past threatened to pull her back into despair. But every time she stumbled, Madame Salma reminded her, "You are not a victim. You are a woman of strength." Months passed, and Aisha's transformation was undeniable. She no longer walked with her head bowed in sorrow. She carried herself with grace and determination. Her small sewing business flourished, and soon she had her own shop, a humble but promising boutique where customers admired her designs and paid generously for her work. The woman who once waited for love to sustain her had now built a future with her own two hands. She was no longer the abandoned wife of Omar. She was Aisha, the woman who had risen from betrayal to find her own power. At first, Omar thought he had won. Life with Nadia was everything he had imagined, luxurious, effortless, and indulgent. She took him to high-end restaurants, dressed him in expensive clothes, and introduced him to people who lived the life he had always dreamed of. He no longer worried about bills, no longer felt the weight of struggle pressing down on his shoulders. For the first time, he was surrounded by wealth, and it was intoxicating. But it did not take long for the illusion to crack. Nadia, who had once showered him with attention and admiration, soon began treating him like a possession rather than a partner. She dictated what he wore, how he spoke, and even where he could go. She expected him to be charming, presentable, and obedient. If he disagreed with her, she would dismiss him with a sharp remark or an annoyed glance, as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Omar, don't embarrass me," she would snap whenever he failed to meet her expectations. "You should be grateful I took you in." Grateful. The word stung. He had left Aisha because he wanted to be more than just a struggling husband, but with Nadia, he was not a husband at all. He was an accessory, a temporary amusement for a woman who had never truly loved him. As weeks turned into months, Omar began to see the emptiness in the world he had chosen. The people in Nadia's circle spoke of money and power, but never of love or loyalty. Relationships were transactions measured by wealth and status. He saw men who were quickly discarded the moment they no longer served a purpose, and a terrible realization settled over him. He was replaceable. He started to notice how Nadia's affection was conditional. She praised him when he looked good at social events, but ignored him when he spoke of his own dreams. She spent lavishly on herself but never once considered his needs. The warmth and care he had once known with Aisha were gone, replaced by cold luxury. At night, when he lay in a bed softer than any he had ever slept in, he found no peace. His mind drifted back to the woman he had left behind. He remembered Aisha's gentle hands, the way she had cared for him even when they had nothing. He remembered the sacrifices she made, the way she had always put him first. And he remembered the look in her eyes the day he walked away, the silent heartbreak she had not voiced. For the first time, regret wrapped around him like a suffocating weight. He had traded love for wealth, only to realize that wealth without love was nothing. And deep down, he knew. He had made the worst mistake of his life. Omar's fall from grace came faster than he ever imagined. One evening, as he entered Nadia's lavish penthouse, he sensed something was off. The air was colder, the usual warmth in her voice absent. She sat on the couch, elegantly dressed as always, but there was no softness in her gaze. "We need to talk," she said, her tone sharp and businesslike. Omar felt his stomach tighten. He had seen this happen to others in Nadia's world, men who were once praised and adored, only to be discarded when they no longer served a purpose. He never thought it would happen to him. "I've met someone else," she said bluntly, sipping her wine. "Someone who actually fits into my world." Omar stared at her, struggling to process her words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this arrangement is over." She leaned back, crossing her legs. You were fun for a while, but let's be honest. This was never meant to last. His heart pounded. Nadia, I left everything for you. She laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. And that was your mistake, wasn't it? He felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. He had given up everything, Aisha, his home, his dignity, for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a temporary distraction. It got worse. Within days, Nadia had erased him from her life. The luxurious apartment was no longer his to stay in. The money, the gifts, the status, all gone. He had no savings, no home, and nowhere to go. The wealthy friends he had once surrounded himself with had no interest in a man who could offer them nothing. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly alone. With nowhere else to turn, he wandered the same streets he had once looked down upon, now one of the very people he had tried so hard to leave behind. The expensive clothes he wore felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of the life he had lost. He knocked on doors searching for work, but no one was willing to hire a man with no skills beyond chasing wealth. As he sat on a park bench one evening, hungry and exhausted, memories of Aisha flooded his mind. He saw her smile, heard her laughter, felt the warmth of her touch. She had loved him when he had nothing, had given him everything despite her own struggles, and he had thrown it all away for an illusion. Regret consumed him, deeper than anything he had ever felt. He had betrayed the one person who had truly cared for him, only to be betrayed in return. Karma had delivered its lesson, and now he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own mistakes. There was only one thought left in his mind. Aisha, the woman he had abandoned, the woman he had broken, and now he could only hope it wasn't too late to ask for forgiveness. Aisha stood in front of her boutique, watching as customers walked in and out, their hands full of elegant handcrafted garments. The shop bore her name, Aisha's Creations, a symbol of the journey she had taken from heartbreak to triumph. The struggling wife Omar had abandoned no longer existed. In her place stood a confident, independent woman who had built a future with her own two hands. Her business had flourished beyond anything she had imagined. With the guidance of Madame Salma and her own relentless determination, Aisha had transformed her small tailoring skills into a brand recognized and respected in the city. Wealthy clients now sought her designs, and her boutique was featured in fashion events. The same society that once dismissed her as a poor tailor's wife now admired her success. But success wasn't just about money. It was about freedom, the ability to stand on her own, to make choices without fear, to wake up each morning knowing she was in control of her destiny. She no longer relied on anyone to provide for her. She had created a life of dignity and purpose, and it was a life that did not include Omar. One afternoon, as she oversaw her staff, an old acquaintance approached her. It was the same woman who had once whispered behind her back about how pitiful she was when Omar left. But today there was no pity in her eyes, only admiration. Aisha, the woman said, her voice laced with respect, you are truly an inspiration. I never imagined you would rise like this. Aisha simply smiled. She no longer needed validation from those who once doubted her. She knew her worth, and that was enough. She had found joy in her work, in the friendships she built, and in the peace of knowing that her happiness no longer depended on anyone else. She travelled, explored new opportunities, and indulged in the simple pleasures of life, things she never had the chance to do when she was weighed down by struggle. She had been broken, yes, but she had rebuilt herself, stronger than before. She had proven that a woman does not need to be saved. She can save herself. And as she stood in the warmth of her success, she felt no bitterness toward Omar, no desire for revenge. She had moved beyond him, beyond the pain he caused. He was merely a chapter in her story, a lesson that had shaped her, but did not define her. Aisha was no longer just Omar's wife. She was Aisha, the woman who had risen from betrayal and built a kingdom of her own. Omar stood outside Aisha's creations, staring at the golden letters of her name shining proudly above the entrance. The shop was elegant, far grander than anything he had ever imagined for her. Customers came and went, admiring the designs, treating her like the successful businesswoman she had become. His heart pounded. He had walked these streets countless times, hesitating at the doorstep, gathering the courage to face the woman he had betrayed. The same woman he had once thought would never survive without him had flourished beyond his wildest dreams. With a deep breath, he stepped inside. Aisha looked up as the door chime rang. For a brief second, surprise flickered in her eyes, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by calm indifference. She was dressed in a stunning embroidered outfit of her own design, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. "Omar," she said, his name sounding unfamiliar on her lips. "What are you doing here?" His throat was dry. I needed to see you." She nodded and gestured for him to sit, but she remained standing, keeping a quiet distance between them. He realized then how much had changed. The Aisha he once knew would have rushed to him, worried for his well-being. But this Aisha was different, stronger, unshaken. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I was blinded by greed. I left you for something I thought was better, but it was nothing compared to what we had." He exhaled, forcing himself to look into her eyes. "I know I hurt you, Aisha, and I regret it every single day." She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. "I lost everything," he continued. "Nadia threw me away the same way I threw you away. I see it now. I had real love, real happiness, and I gave it up for an illusion." He swallowed hard. "I know I don't deserve it, but can you forgive me?" Aisha sighed, crossing her arms. "Omar, forgiveness is not the same as going back to what was." His chest tightened. "I know I don't deserve you, but if you'd give me a chance, I can make things right. We can start over." A sad smile touched her lips. "Start over?" she repeated. "Omar, the woman you left no longer exists. She waited for you once, cried for you, suffered because of you. But that woman grew into someone stronger, someone who found happiness on her own." His heart sank. "You don't love me anymore?" She looked at him, her gaze soft but firm. "I loved you once. I loved you enough to endure pain, to sacrifice for us. But love isn't enough when it isn't valued." She exhaled slowly. "I have built a life that I am proud of, and I will not go back to being the woman who begged for your love." Omar lowered his head, the weight of his choices crushing him. Aisha had forgiven him, but she would never be his again. Omar sat across from Aisha in the quiet corner of her boutique, his hands trembling as he clutched his last hope. He had come here believing that if he apologized, if he showed his regret, she might take him back. But the woman before him was no longer the Aisha he had once known. Her eyes no longer held sadness for him, only quiet strength. "I understand now," he murmured, his voice thick with desperation. "I threw away the best thing I ever had. You loved me when I had nothing, and I repaid you by chasing after an illusion. I was a fool, Aisha." He swallowed hard, his gaze pleading. "But I've changed. I see my mistakes now. I just want—" He hesitated, then whispered, "I just want us back." Aisha sighed, shaking her head. "Omar, I have no hatred toward you. I have no anger left either. But what you're asking for—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's impossible." He flinched. "Why? We loved each other once. We can fix this." She smiled sadly. "I loved you, Omar. I loved you with everything I had. And when you left, I thought I would never recover. I cried. I broke. I suffered." Her eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. "But that suffering shaped me. It forced me to find myself outside of being your wife. And in doing that, I realized I don't need you. I never did. Omar's breathing grew unsteady. Aisha, please. She lifted a hand, silencing him gently. You left me because you thought I was a burden. And in doing so, you freed me. I became more than just someone's wife. I became me. She stood, straightening her posture with quiet dignity. And I love the woman I have become far too much to ever go back to the woman who waited for you. Omar's eyes filled with desperation. I'll do anything, Aisha. Just give me a chance. She looked at him, a ghost of a smile on her lips. You had your chance, and you threw it away. Tears burned in Omar's eyes as he reached for her hand, but she stepped back. His world, once filled with wealth and luxury, had crumbled, and now the only thing he had left, his last hope, was slipping away from him. Aisha took one final look at the man she had once loved. Then, with quiet grace, she turned and walked away, her steps steady, unwavering. Omar remained frozen in his seat, watching as she disappeared through the doors of her own success, leaving him behind in the wreckage of his choices. It was over. Aisha had chosen herself. Aisha stood on the balcony of her new home, overlooking the bustling city that once felt so distant from her reach. The evening breeze brushed against her skin, carrying with it the scent of blooming jasmine, a reminder of how far she had come. She had built a life of independence, a life that belonged solely to her, no longer defined by heartbreak, no longer waiting for someone to complete her. She was whole on her own. Her boutique was thriving, expanding beyond what she had ever imagined. People who once pitied her now admired her, seeking her designs, her wisdom, and her strength. But more than the success, it was the peace in her heart that truly mattered. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her closest friend and business partner, Layla. "Are you ready?" Layla asked with a smile. Aisha nodded, grabbing her purse. Tonight, she was being honoured at a women's empowerment gala, a recognition of her journey from a discarded wife to a symbol of resilience. She had once been broken, but now she stood tall, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told she was not enough. As she stepped outside across town, Omar sat alone in a dimly lit cafe. His once proud posture was slumped, his eyes filled with regret. He had lost everything, not just his wealth, but the one woman who had ever truly loved him. He had thought money would bring him happiness, but now he had neither riches nor love. He had spent nights replaying his choices, wondering if there had ever been a way to undo them. But the truth was simple. He had destroyed the love he once had with his own hands. And now all he could do was watch from a distance as Aisha flourished without him. Aisha, however, no longer thought of Omar with pain. He was a lesson, a chapter in her life that had led her to where she was now. She did not need revenge or validation. Her success was enough. As she stepped onto the gala's stage that evening, standing before an audience who saw her as a beacon of hope, she smiled. She was not just Aisha, the woman who had been left behind. She was Aisha, the woman who had risen. And with that thought, she lifted her head high, embracing her new beginning, one built on strength, self-respect, and the unwavering belief that she was more than enough.